Another edition of Anvil's Brown Bag webcast. It's a pleasure for us today to have one of my former classmates at Western Washington University, Chris Witherspoon. He is the CEO at DNA. He and I go, I'd say we go way back, but it's not as best buddies so much as former classmates, and now we're obviously in the same industry in the world of marketing and advertising. I'll let him talk about himself, but I do want to make sure I get in a few important notes. He was named one of the first ever Think Northwest All-Stars. Think Northwest is formerly with the Portland Ad Fed, and I think it's now combined with Seattle and San Francisco. So it's a West Coast moniker and a kind of a big deal. And he is also a Campaign US 40 over 40. And I'm not one of those. So congratulations on that. I'm actually most proud of the fact that you were recently appointed by Governor Inslee to serve as a Western Washington University trustee. I don't know what all that entails, if you get a gold watch or whatever, but maybe you can tell us about some of that and your journey from Western to the top rung at DNA, and maybe we can talk a little bit about your focus and experience with basically the whole, frankly, for lack of a better term, sort of racist inequity in the system in advertising and marketing. So with that said, why don't I hand it over to you, Chris, and tell us your story and give us some highlights, and we'll go into some questions.
That's great, Ken. Thank you very much again for inviting me to be a part of this, and excited to have a conversation. In terms of my story, I graduated from Western Washington University back in 1994. We were, to your point, classmates back then. I can't believe it's been that long. It doesn't feel like it's been that long ago. And I was one of those folks who actually knew what they wanted to do coming into college, frankly. I was a bit of a latchkey kid. And what I mean by that is just I watched a lot of TV when I was younger, and kind of, was able to learn early that people get made for all these ideas, in between the programs that I watched. And a lot of that came from even watching television, the Darren Stevens of the world from Bewitched, and Bosom Buddies, who, they have this cool creative agency and things like that. And I'm like, wow, people get paid to come up with ads. That sounds fun. And so as I entered Western, I kind of knew that I wanted to go into marketing. And as I kind of went through the path of getting my degree in marketing, there were a couple people, one professor, specifically Professor TJ Olney, who's no longer with us, but he kind of stirred a passion around advertising for me. It was a class that I took with him, and I'm like, God, this is really cool. And so again, coming out of Western, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go into advertising, and I wasn't quite sure where in advertising. Do I want to be a creative? Do I want to be a media? And I really wasn't certain, but I knew I wanted to work for an agency. And I also knew that I needed a job right out of it. I didn't have the luxury of, being able to travel or anything. I needed to get to work pretty soon. And so, 94, the market wasn't great, to be honest, in terms of getting into advertising. And I stumbled on an opportunity at an agency called DDB, or Elgin DDB at the time. It ended up being the DDB Needham office in Seattle. And they were a great agency, and they did some really great work, worked with a lot of fun brands, McDonald's, Diadora, Holland America line, to name a few. And they had set up a program because hiring was so tight, where they were looking for one individual. And I look back and I laugh a little bit, because this would be a reality TV show today. They basically brought in 3, young people right out of college, and they said, we're going to hire each of you on a 90-day contract, so 3 months. And at the end of it, we'll choose one of you to, get the role of assistant account executive. And that was kind of my entryway into advertising. Was all I knew was that I was competing with 2 other folks. And at the end of this, I needed to win this job. And I'd always been competitive. My background was in sports. I played football in college. So always been highly competitive. And so I did what kind of ever it took, worked nights and weekends, tried to do everything extra, and got lucky from the standpoint at the end of the 90 days. They brought us into a room and said, the job is going to Chris. And so that was the start of my career, was at DDB, and worked there for a few years. Again, worked on a number of the brands that I had said before. Started off on Diadora, worked on McDonald's, worked on All America line, and a few other brands as well. And then my boss, who is still a great friend today, he had actually left for a little while and actually then came back to the agency. And I went into his office and actually was telling him, "Hey, I wanted to let you know I'm engaged, and I'm going to be getting married." And actually, it was my wife today, and who I met at Western in college. And he said, "Well, that's awesome. I'm so excited for you. Can I give you some advice?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." He's like, "Leave, get out of this place." And I was like, "Are you serious?" And he said, "Yeah." He goes, "This is a great market. It's a great agency, but there's so much more, and you need to go experience it." And so he helped me, frankly, dust off my resume. This was, probably 3 years after being at DDB. Dust off my resume and start looking at other places. And it was odd, but that was kind of the push, was my boss. And we ultimately, I ended up getting contacted by Fallon McGilligan, now Fallon, but Fallon McGilligan in Minneapolis, about a role as an account executive on Miller Lite. They had just won the business, and they were actually building the account. And I thought, wow, I was in my early 20s, getting to go work on beer. That sounded, pretty fun. And so my wife and I originally had talked about, well, if we're going to move, maybe we go to New York, or maybe we go to San Francisco or LA. And the job ended up sounding so good, we made the move to Minneapolis, which we hadn't planned. So went there and had the opportunity to work with some amazing people, in particular, Pat Fallon, who today I, still see as a mentor and think of that way, though Pat has, passed away. But I a lot of times put myself in this situation where I think about what Pat would have done. He really thought about and ran the agency as kind of family as a business. There's an incredible story I always like to tell, is that one day my wife and I had our first child at Fallon, when I was at Fallon. And one day I was in my office grinding away. I'd been working a ton. It was a job that actually required me to be on the road quite a bit because of production and a lot of stuff that we're doing. And I happened to be back in Minneapolis, and we had just had my first daughter, probably a few weeks before. Pat walks into my office and he says, "Hey, you need to get going." And I'm like, "Need to get going?" And he just throws this envelope on my desk and he said, "Yeah, you got a flight to catch." And I'm like, "Oh crap, or I guess I'm going on the road again." And he said, "Yeah, you got a flight to catch. You're going back to Seattle. You and your wife need to go see your family." And he had already arranged, my wife, had told her, he booked the flight, had everything set up, and sent me home because he's like, "You need it right now." And to me, it was like a defining moment in terms of how you can and should run a business and put people first. And I think about that all the time. I think about that all the time with my own, team now, of, this idea of family as a business. And so anyway, that was a powerful thing for me. And Pat was a really big figure in my career. So was another gentleman named Rich Stoddard, who was my group account director, ran the Miller business, ran some other businesses there. Is a guy today I still call up and ask for advice. He's gone on to be, CEO of major companies and agency networks and things like that. So I was pretty fortunate to have some great people around me. But ultimately, Minneapolis, we kind of got tired of the winters, my wife in particular, and we made the decision that we needed to get back to the West Coast. I actually was started to get recruited by Chiat Day and to run the Levi's business out of San Francisco. And I thought, how cool would it be to go work on an iconic brand like Levi's? And decided to pick up, and we moved there. And it was a great experience. There was a lot. It was probably one of the most turbulent times of my career in terms of the learning curve. I came in and to run the account, and it was the first time where I think I reported directly to the CEO, and everything was kind of on me. And so I was, a little over my skis, but I learned a ton, worked my butt off. And, I worked on the account for about 3 years, and it was one of those things where I think I came in and I was the, fifth account director in 4 years, just because it churned through people, but we were able to stabilize it and stay on it for a while. But ultimately we ended up losing the business to the global agency, BBH, and they ended up taking it on. And so I made my way to, actually, as a funny story, I'd been trying to get recruited by Goodby Silverstein and Partners. They had been calling me, and I kept saying, "Oh, I'm not interested. No, I'm not interested. I love what I'm doing." And the head of account management at the time had called me, and after news of us losing the account got public, he called me up and said, "Hey, okay, are you ready to talk?" And I said I was. And so made the jump to go to Goodby Silverstein and Partners, initially to work on E-Trade. Worked on that business for a couple of years, got moved on to HP, and helped run that piece of business for a few years as well. And then got a call from an agency up in Seattle called Publicis. And the funny thing was, I saw a few of my friends making their way up there. And I got a call about the T-Mobile business. Airstream had just rebranded from T-Mobile. They had started to invest more. It was growing, and they needed help in running and growing that business. And it was the opportunity, frankly, for my wife and I to come home full circle. We'd been gone away for almost 8 or 9 years, and decided to make the move back, and went to Publicis to help run T-Mobile, worked on a bunch of other things there, and again, was surrounded by some really, really amazing people, and did some really fun work for the brand for about 4 years, almost 5, and got the itch I felt like I was at a point in my career where, I'd done this, I'd been exposed to some amazing people. Like I said, got to work with Pat Fallon, got to work with, exposed to Lee Clow at Chiat Day, got to work with, Jeff Goodby, Rich Silverstein, some people that are honestly now iconic in the industry. So I felt like, what, I've learned a lot from some really good folks. I need to go do this on my own. I need to go start my own agency. And so that was my plan. I was going to break away. I, had some good friend who was a strategist, a good friend who was a creative, and we started building a business plan to create our own agency. At the same time, I got reached out to by a recruiter who knew of an agency called DNA Seattle at the time, that was looking for somebody to come in at kind of the director of client services, managing director level, to help them. And I had heard a little bit about the agency. I knew Alan Brown and Dan Gross more, through word of mouth and socially than I did from a business standpoint. And met with Alan and Dan, who were the co-founders of DNA. And at the time, DNA was, less than half of the size we are right now. And they had gotten wind that I was going to, go out and try and start my own thing. And Alan and Dan basically just said, well, instead of trying to do it on your own, why don't you come and try and do it with us? We're, still at a size and at a scale where you can kind of help shape this agency. And so it was a pretty big turn for me, because I had worked for mostly holding company agencies, larger agencies, and made the decision to go work for a really, really small agency. But at the same time, it was the chance to put my mark on it. It was the chance to for ownership. And that was 13 years ago. And so I've, been with DNA since then. Have been partnered with Alan and Dan. Most recently, in the last year, Dan has kind of stepped back from the business. Alan and I have taken the majority stake of the company, and so I've taken on the role as CEO in doing that. And we're at a different stage right now, and we've also had some really good momentum over the last few years too. And I'm excited and proud of the accolades, obviously individually, but more importantly, I'm more excited and even more proud of the work that we've done as a team. A lot of that culminated last year into Small Agency of the Year for our region. There's been a lot of work over the last few years that we've put in together with our leadership team to kind of get to this point. This year, we've, kind of started off gangbusters. Recently we have won the PAPS business and are doing some really fun work there. We've expanded our relationship and are the agency of record, the experiential agency of record for Amazon Fresh, both from the creative and the media. And so, like I said, have some great momentum going right now. And my focus as CEO is growing and scaling this business. I say this a lot. I don't want to be a great Seattle agency. I want to be a great agency that happens to be in Seattle, which is obviously the city I love. But our focus and our ambitions are having an impact on people, business, and culture moving forward. And really, that's what we're aiming to do and where we're at. So that's my long-winded way of kind of telling my story, I guess.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to have the team queue up some questions, but I have a few questions and comments myself. So we graduated the same year, but I took me an extra summer quarter to get out of Western. And my first job was an internship at DDB on the PR side. So I think we were both there at the same time. You were actually getting paid and I wasn't. And if there was a competition, they didn't tell me about it. So, but yeah, because I remember it was 3 months full time and it was a $500 stipend for the whole thing. Yeah. And I remember the pinnacle of my career was sitting next to somebody in one of the small conference rooms assembling press kits. And I looked over and I was like, great job. Huh? He's like, yeah, I'm making $8 an hour. And I looked at him, I was like, making nothing. And I'm the one with the degree. So anyway, that was poignant. I could go back with a bunch of stories about their golf tournament for the McDonald's.
Oh yeah, the Pub Classic. Yeah.
That was there was a lot of problems with that. Anyway, it was a great experience and spending time with Vandy, Kindred, and realizing that I should have been a copywriter. That's what I wanted to be, but I didn't go to art school, so too bad. Just as well, I probably would have failed. So you started in Seattle, you came back to Seattle. For those of you that, for those listeners that didn't grow up in Seattle like I did, what keeps you in Seattle? What drew you back to Seattle?
Seattle is just this amazing mixture of, creativity, technology, innovation, and I like I said, I had the chance to go work in Minneapolis. I had the chance to go work in San Francisco. I spent a lot of time working in LA, going back and forth, and frankly, even a lot of time in New York. And there's just something special about Seattle. I love the outdoors. His background, I was born in North Carolina, but I grew up in Alaska. So oh, wow. I am kind of an outdoorsy kind of guy. And Seattle provides that big and small, work-life balance that I love. But like I said, there's also something really interesting about it in terms of the innovation and the entrepreneurship of Seattle. When you think about the companies that have grown up here, the Starbucks, the Microsoft, the Amazon, Boeing, you name it, it's a city that breeds innovation and breeds a sense of ambition that I really am attracted to. And so wanted to be back in it.
That's awesome. And so your agency has generated a lot of buzz. I read Ad Age, Ad Week, and so forth, and I've seen you in there a couple times. How big was the firm headcount wise when you first came on board, and how big are you now? Just out of curiosity.
I think we were, 20-ish or under, just under around that number. And we're 60-ish,
Okay.
with some open for hires, which is
Yeah.
tough right now. Everybody's trying to hire. So so we've flexed up and down, and that's kind of where we're at right now with some growth still in front of us.
And what's your ideal size, or where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years, or how long do you want to be running the helm at DNA?
Yeah, so in terms of size, and I get this question a lot, it's like, Lee Clow used to say, how big can you be before you're bad, right? And I kind of think about it the same way, in terms of there's not necessarily a number that I'm working towards. I want to be at a size where we can fulfill the needs of our clients, meaning that we have the capabilities in all areas. And so, like, for instance, right now, we have a big focus on data and analytics and trying to grow that out. And that's going to require new skills, new bodies, and everything else. We're continuing to grow out in digital and social and things along those lines. And so for me, it's more around, do we have the capabilities and the services to help our clients have the impact that they want to have or need to have? And so, I could see ourselves being double this number in 5 years, but I'm not necessarily targeting, I want to be 150 or something like that.
Okay.
In terms of how long do I want to be at it? I still get my energy around working with people and seeing people develop and helping them develop. And for me, as long as I'm still having fun and I'm still able to do that, I'll keep going. I don't want to overstay my welcome in terms of, the business passing me by, but I do get a lot of joy in the work that I do, and kind of coming up as an account person. And I say this a lot, as an account person, you're a generalist among specialists, right? So there's creatives who specialize, there's media, even strategy to some extent. And I kind of, as an account person, you kind of need to know a little bit about everything. You don't go deep on it, on one thing, but you got to know a little bit about everything. And I've always gotten energy from that, because no day is the same for me. One day I'm sitting down with a creative team and working and thinking about an idea. The next day I'm working with finance. The next day I'm working with our strategy group, or next hour. So that's what I love about it, the variety. And so, I'll probably keep going for a while longer. And the thing for me, just like, and I give Alan and Dan a lot of credit about thinking about succession planning. I'm getting to that point in my career of thinking about, okay, I want to keep doing it for a while, but what's the next chapter for DNA? How do we set DNA up for the future? I think Alan and I both believe in and appreciate being independent. And I think that's where we want to continue to be. So how do we set ourselves up to continue to be an independent agency?
Got it. Thank you. Another question is really talk about your journey with this movement with DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm reading a lot in Ad Age, in particular, about what's going on and trying to right some of the wrongs and the inequalities within the industry, and big brands and advertisers allocating dollars to Black-owned businesses and the BIPOC community and the media players in the media space. What's what's your hot take on all this? How bad is it, and how much better has it gotten, and how much farther do we need to go?
Yeah. I'll start with like my personal experience, and then kind of expand on some of those questions that you asked. So I think the industry, it was very different when I came up in the industry, and there was so much focus on honestly trying to fit in versus embracing the differences in people. And I think back in my own personal experience that, the same boss who I raved about, and still is a close friend of mine, who told me to leave, was also the same person. When coming out of college, I played football, probably a little bigger. I had, an earring, a goatee, looked a little probably intimidating. And that was one of the things he told me, is like, hey, you're going to scare the crap out of some people here. So you might want to dial it back, lose the earring, maybe shave, blah, blah, blah. And the funny thing is I look back on it right now and I'm like, wow, okay, so it was about fitting in. It wasn't about embracing who you are and the diversity, what diversity brings and everything else. And again, it wasn't, I'm not saying that was like a racist thing to do, but that was where our industry was at, right? It was about a simulation and trying to fit in and everything else. And to be honest, it was that way for a long, long time in the industry. I think where the industry is headed and the awakening is how diversity breeds better thinking and better ideas through all the different backgrounds, perspectives of what people can bring. And so I think that's what you're seeing. I think, coming off of 2020 in the wake of, George Floyd's murder and kind of the social unrest that was happening there, I do think that was an eye opener for the industry. For me personally, I got involved with an organization called 600 and Rising. And what that started with was two individuals, Bennett D. Bennett, Nathan Young, basically wanted to pen an open letter to our industry to say, things need to change. And here's some steps that we think the industry needs to take. I was pretty fortunate. I was one of the early people to sign on, and then ultimately ended up being asked to be a board member in which this turned into an organization. And the organization is really based on transparency, advocacy for more diversity in our industry. And so we've continued to push on that, and that's been a big part of what I've done. But the thing is, though we're seeing changes, there hasn't been enough. And so there's, some data, if you look back, and I think the number is late 70s, early 80s, when you look at diversity in the advertising industry, I think the figure was right around 5.4% of non-white in our industry. I think that number is around 6%. So it has been, minor in terms of the changes and the incremental changes that have happened in our industry.
You're saying, real quick, Chris,
Yeah.
You're saying that the total non-white population of advertising professionals is 6% non-white?
It was and I don't have the figures in front of me, and so don't quote me exactly on that. But
not a big number.
But the number is small. But I think more importantly, and if I get the number wrong, I'll acknowledge I get the number wrong. But I think the bigger point is the percentage change is what is the staggering part of it. It is barely changed in almost, over 25, 30 years. And that is, to me, the bigger issue is, though we've seen an awakening, though we've seen people understanding the need for more diversity, we haven't seen a big change. For Black individuals in particular, the one figure that I do know is, 68% of Black individuals in advertising have 5 or less years of experience. And the reason why that is we have two issues. We have an issue of getting people in, and we also have a churn-out issue. And so the number of folks that are that end up staying, that number is a fairly junior number. There's not a lot of senior people, African Americans, in senior levels that are staying in. They're churning out. And so for me, I've obviously got involved in BLA or in 600 Rising, and that's been a big area of focus for me. Again, trying to, in terms of advocacy, transparency, and really trying to kind of push there. The other thing, or the other area, has been with an organization called BLAC, which is Black Building Leaders and Creators. And that's been trying to address really the pipeline issue, the issue of getting more folks, people of color, into the industry. BLAC is a 12-week paid internship program, national internship program that is focused on bringing more Black talent into the industry to kind of learn, grow, and thrive and lead. And so have been focused on that. DNA was one of the founding agencies. I'm currently board chair of that organization. We're in our second year. Last year, we were able to put over 20 individuals into jobs. This year, our focus will be doubling that. Our goal is year over year, over the next 5 years, to continue to double that number of how many people of color we're putting into the advertising industry.
So Chris, those I'm taking notes here. 600andrising.com and then blacinternship.com, are those the two sites?
That's correct. Yeah.
So as an agency executive, business owners, marketers, they can go to the internship and apply to participate.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's fair to say. I mean, this year the programs were just wrapping up in terms of who will be involved this year.
Right.
It starts May 9th. But if you're interested, absolutely, you can reach out through the website. And right now, I mean, we have a wait list of over 40 agencies that are wanting to get involved. Our biggest challenge is scaling the program and growing it. So, but if folks are interested, would love to hear from them.
Are you familiar with the Emerging Leaders program in Portland? It's very similar.
I am. Yeah,
okay.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
Okay, great.
And then the other program, which is MAPE, which is through the 4As. And MAPE is a great internship program. My daughter went through it. And that's a program that's focused on minorities and people of color.
That's a MAIP?
Yep.
Got it. I'll add that to the show notes. Thank you. This is great. So, Chris, I want to be respectful of your time and our need to eat some lunch. And so I want to thank you for your time. This has been fantastic. I wish we had a little more time, but you and I will have to catch up later and talk about golf tournaments and other enjoyable, fun things from at least my short stint at Elgin DDB. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for your time. I'm going to include a link to your creates. Again, Chris Witherspoon, what are you willing to tell them, and how easy do you want people to find you online?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, you broke up a little bit. Yeah, I mean, in terms of, you can find me on my LinkedIn, my contact info is, c.witherspoon@dnacreates.com. You can always shoot me an email there. I'm not always the best on that, but through that and LinkedIn, feel free to reach out.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll send you a copy of this. This will be available, this recording, on our YouTube channel, on the tube. That's YouTube or something like that. The first time I ever heard somebody say, check out YouTube, I just typed in YouTube and I couldn't find it. Anyway, thank you, Chris, for your time. Go Vikings, and congrats on your journey and your growth and success at DNA and all the work you're doing in the DEI space. We're going to highlight all these URLs in the show notes.
That's great.
Thanks again for your time, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.
All right, Kent, thanks so much for the invitation. It was great to chat.
Yeah, you bet. Take care.
All right.